Hello and welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to be tier ranking the main villains from Super Sentai. These are only going to be from seasons which I've seen, which is Jetman to Boonboomger, and I will be limiting it to one villain per faction, so seasons with multiple factions will have multiple on this tier list. And even though there are a couple of seasons I don't think have main villains, I'll include a villain for every single season. So without further ado, this is my tier ranking for the Super Sentai main villains from Jetman to Boonboomger. First up is Hurricaneger from Jetman. He's a pretty alright villain. He's definitely the least interesting of the Vyram, but as a main villain, he's intimidating. I mean, he shows his strength by beating Transit so hard he goes insane. Overall, he's pretty boring, but he's still intimidating and a pretty respectable villain, so he's going in B tier. Next is Bandora from Gekiranger, and I really like her. She's one of my favorite villains. As a villain, she's not great. She never really fights the Gekirangers herself. She never really has any interactions with them. But just in general, I think she's really funny. I like her hatred of kids. It's kind of funny. And she's one of the only characters in Gekiranger that actually has a backstory that's explained, which is kind of funny. As a villain, not that good because she's not that intimidating. But I think she's funny, and obviously it's some reader repulsive nostalgia. So she's going in S tier. Next is Lieutenant Colonel Shadam from Dekaranger, and I really like him, even though he's kind of a boring villain, kind of just a generic military soldier. I just like how cool he is, and just that he works his way up to becoming Emperor by the end. Obviously not that memorable, but I think overall he's intimidating, and he's a pretty good villain, so he's going in A tier. Next is Daimao from Gekiranger, and I really don't like him, especially because I think Kashidokuro was a way better villain, and he replaces Kashidokuro, and he's just really lame, mostly because he has a really funny design, but he's supposed to be taken seriously, so it's kind of hard to do that, and also that he doesn't really do anything, so he's not a good villain to me. He's D tier. Next is Bacchus Wrath from O-Ranger. I like him a little bit. I think he has some funny moments. Can't really be taken seriously because of how weird and funny he looks. But he has some funny moments, especially with Buldaunt. And he dies midway through the season, but I still think he could be considered the main villain. So while I don't think he's a great villain, he's funny enough. So he's going in C tier. Next is Emperor Exhaust from Gekiranger, and I think he's a pretty good villain. Just his plan of destroying planets just to make his interplanetary highway is so ridiculous. It fits Gekiranger really well. But also, unlike the other Bozak, he's actually intimidating and feels like an actual threat. So he works pretty well as the main villain of Gekiranger. He's not around that much because he's introduced pretty late into the season, but I still think he's a pretty good villain, so he's going in B tier. Next is Dr. Hinalar from Magiranger. He's alright. He has an interesting connection with Kubota with his backstory, and also to Shibalena. And he is cool as he starts off as a henchman under Javius and kills him and takes over the main villain role. But overall kind of is just a generic mad scientist and isn't too memorable, but he's good enough, so he's going in C tier. Next is Zahab from Gingaman. This one really disappoints me because I really like his design. It's super cool, and I think the Balban are one of the best factions in Sentai period, but just Zahab is such a lame villain. He just sits around his ship all day, really until he's literally the last one of his faction remaining, so he's D tier. Next is Grandinu from Go-Go 5. She's a very forgettable villain. She's one of my least favorite tropes of villains where they're dead and they have to be revived. And while I think she's better than most because she's at least has some presence throughout the season, she just doesn't do much. When she's fully revived, she's pretty intimidating, but that's only for like the last couple episodes. So for the most part, she's just a disembodied spirit or just stuck in her lair. So she's D tier. Next is Don Del Nero from Time Ranger, and he's by far the best villain in all of Sentai. I wouldn't even say he's the true main villain, because there's another character that kind of pulls the strings, but I'm not going to spoil that here. But just Don Del Nero is pretty much the only villain who I feel like feels like an actual character. Even though he is motivated by greed, he really cares for his family, and you especially see that when Geen leaves and he has to deal with that, and just the way he interacts with his family, he has a melancholy about it. He seems like an actual character, not just some crazy lunatic wanting to take over the world. Even though he does want to steal money and stuff, he really just still cares for his family, and really no other villain does that. So he's the best villain in all of Sentai in my opinion. He's going in S tier. Next is Ultimate Org Senki from Go-Ranger, and Go-Ranger is one of the seasons where I don't think they have a main villain, but Senki is the final boss, so I'll put him here. He's a pretty lame villain because he's only around for the last 2 episodes, but he is intimidating enough and does a lot of damage to the Go-Rangers on the Animarium. So while there's some cool moments, he's basically just a glorified monster of the week, so he's going in D tier. Next is Taozant from Hurricaneger, and he's the worst villain in all Sentai in my opinion. He literally does nothing. He sits around, he never leaves his lair. Even in the last episode when he achieves something, he is instantly killed by Sandaru. He's literally a nothing villain. He literally just sits around and does nothing else, so he's D tier. Next is Desmazoria from Magiranger, and he's another lame villain. He's another villain who's dead and needs to be revived, so he's really not around for the vast majority of the season. He does have some influence and some presence because he's the one who influenced Abare Killer and other stuff, but overall he's really only around the last couple episodes where he is pretty cool and intimidating, but overall just doesn't do anything for the majority of the season, so he's going in D tier. Next is Agent Umbrella from Dekaranger. The concept of him is really cool, especially for Dekaranger, where he's just an arms dealer supplying the alienizers and isn't like a world's conqueror or something. And he is cool for the first 30 episodes when he's more in the shadows, but after he reveals himself and stuff, he just becomes a pretty generic villain. Although he does take over the Deca base in the finale, so he does accomplish his mission. He's still a pretty cool villain overall, so he's going in B tier. Next is Enma from Magiranger. Again, he's a villain where he's dead and needs to be revived, but I really like his design. I think it looks really cool, and he is intimidating even though he's not around very long. He has one of the better impressions out of those type of villains, so even though he isn't around long, I think he makes a pretty good impression, so he's C tier. Next is Gaja, leader of the Gordom from Boukenger, and he's definitely the weakest of the Boukenger main villains. He's kind of just there. He has a really funny voice, so every single time he shows up it's pretty funny. But overall, the Gordom are just pretty lame, and he doesn't really do anything until the end where he's the last person standing and is the final boss, so he's D tier. Next is Ryuan, leader of the Jaryu from Boukenger, and he's way more interesting than Gaja. Just because his backstory is that he's also an adventurer like the Boukengers, and I always like connections between protagonists and antagonists. And also just the Jaryu are a lot more interesting, and they're just more intimidating in general. So he's nothing crazy, but I like his backstory and think he's alright, so he's B tier. Next is Yami no Yaiba of Dark Shadow from Boukenger. He's actually not the leader of Dark Shadow, Mabaroshi no Gecko is, but Yaiba actually does things, and he's really cool with his connection to Bouken Black's backstory, and just he's a badass, cool armored warrior guy, and he's really the only member of Dark Shadow who can be taken seriously, so I really like him as an awesome design, has a cool connection to Bouken Black's backstory. He's A tier. Next is Guy, leader of the Questers from Boukenger, and he's pretty cool. Has a really cool design, especially once he becomes a Quester. Has a connection to Eiji's backstory, so every time they meet it's pretty cool. But other than that, isn't too memorable. He's still pretty cool, so he's B tier. Next is Long from Gekiranger, and he's one of the best villains as a puppet master, string puller type villain who manipulated all the events to happen as he saw fit. And what's most interesting is that his motivation is just because he's bored. He's a celestial being, so he just messes with people for fun, which is a pretty cool motivation other than just wanting to take over the world. So his manipulation and stuff is really cool, and I think he's one of the best villains in Sentai, so he's S tier. Next is Yokoshima Cretin from Go-Onger, and like Senki, he's kind of just a final boss. He is technically the boss of all the other Guy Arc generals, but as a main villain, he's really lame, kind of just appears in the last couple episodes to be the final boss, and that's it. Not very memorable at all, so he's D tier. Next is Dokok Chimatsuri from Shinkenger, and I think he's an awesome villain. A little bit of it might be nostalgia for Power Ranger Samurai, but overall I think he's a really intimidating villain. Even though a lot of the time he is just stuck in his ship in the Sanzu River, he at least has a reason for it as he's sealed there, and when he's able to leave, he does a lot of damage and is really cool. So while he doesn't do much, he at least shows that he can be intimidating and has a reason for not being able to leave his lair. So I think he's still pretty good. He has an awesome design, he's really intimidating, so I think he's A tier. Next is Mons Drake, leader of the Warstar from Go-Onger, and he's just a generic alien warlord. I think he's pretty cool. design-wise, but it's just a really generic villain, so he's D tier. Next is Makuin, leader of the Yumaju from Go-Onger. He at least has a pretty unique design, but overall he's also really generic and isn't that interesting. I guess he just wants to pollute the world, so that is a little more interesting than the War Star, but I still don't like him as much as Monstrake. He's a pretty generic villain. He's D tier. Next is Robogog, leader of the Matrintis from Go-Onger, and he's my favorite of the 3 different villain faction leaders. He just has a really cool design, has a pretty interesting backstory as a human who built his invincible body and hates humans and wants to enslave them now. It does his relationship with Metal Alice. That's interesting. Again, not too deep, but he's the coolest of the 3 villains, so he's C tier. Next is Brajira, the true main villain of Go-Onger, and he's a pretty cool surprise villain as a lieutenant for all the previous villain factions, turning up to be the actual true villain. It's a pretty interesting idea. I don't think it's perfect because we don't know too much about Gosei World, and he's the fallen Gosei Angel, so it would have been a lot more interesting if we knew more about that. But his motivation as he sees himself as the savior of everyone, pretty interesting. He doesn't see him as evil. Overall, he's pretty cool, a pretty unique villain, so he's A tier. Next is Actos Gil from Gekiranger. He's alright, he has a really cool design, is intimidating, much more than Warsgill. But I don't think he's as good because Warsgill at least has a personality, even if he isn't the most intimidating villain, and Actos Gil is just a generic main villain. He is cool, he actually is intimidating as a villain, but he just isn't around too much and is just really generic. So he's C tier. Next is Enter from Go Busters, and he's another one of my favorite villains. He's just super charismatic and funny, while also being intimidating. And he's also kind of like Dr. Hilar, where he works for a stronger power, in this case Messiah, but eventually turns on him and becomes the actual main villain. I will say he definitely falls off after the first fight with Messiah in the virtual world, which is why he isn't my favorite villain, but I still like him a lot. He's really charismatic and funny with his use of French, and once he disposes of Messiah for good in the last couple episodes, he's really intimidating. So he's still my second favorite villain. He's S tier. Next is Debos from ToQger. Again, he's one of the villains where he's dead and has to be revived, but he's definitely the best of those because he isn't just revived in like the last couple episodes and then immediately defeated. He's revived with like 8 or 9 episodes remaining and actually does some really cool things. So while I wish he was around more, he's still one of the villain tropes I don't really like, but he's the best at those, so he's C tier. Next is Dark Emperor Z from ToQger, and he's a really interesting villain as he's a Dark Emperor, but he's infatuated with the light, so that's a cool contrast. And overall he's a very intimidating villain, has an awesome monster form, but it's kind of just generic as an Emperor of Darkness. So I think he's really cool. He's just a little too generic, but I still like him a lot, so he's A tier. Next is Kibaoni Gengetsu from Ninninger, and he's another one of the worst villains, which is lame because he has an awesome design, but again he's a trope of being dead and has to be revived. So he's revived in like the last 2 episodes and does something in the last episode, so he's just really lame. And I think even Qamon is the final boss and he's not even the final boss, so it's just really lame because he has such a cool design, so he's D tier. Next is Genus from Go-Onger, and this is such a wasted opportunity because really most of the season he just sits around in his ship and that's all he does. The death game in general is interesting. He likes playing with people's lives, but his motivation for doing it is that he's just insecure of himself because he's just an amalgamation of all the grunts. So I wish he did more. He's basically just a slightly better version of Taozant because he gets up like 1 or 2 times and that's it. So he's D tier. Next is Don Armigay from Gekiranger, and he's a pretty cool villain. He's interesting in that he's a disembodied spirit and has to possess people to have a body. So that's an interesting idea, and his monster form is pretty cool and has a cool connection to Tsurugi's backstory. But overall, just the fact that he's the embodiment of evil in the universe is really lame, and overall it's kind of just a generic villain. But he's cool enough, so he's B tier. Next is Don Dogranio from Lupin Ranger vs. Powder Ranger, and he's another lame villain. He's a cool idea as a mob boss, but overall just kind of sits around and does nothing until the last couple episodes. He just has no real connection to the Lupin Rangers. Like Zamigo is more of a main villain to them than Dogranio, so he's just kind of lame, and I wish more was done with him, so he's D tier. Next is Eris from Ryusoulger, and she's one of the most interesting villains in all the Sentai. She's basically God who created the Ryusoul tribe, and because the Ryusoul tribe started messing up Earth, she created the Druidon to deal with them, and then the Druidon ended up becoming more of a problem than the Ryusoul tribe, and that just wants to destroy everything in the end. So she isn't really evil, she's kind of just wants to preserve the nature of the universe. But what sucks is that she's really only mentioned first in like the last 10 episodes and then appears in like the last 8, so she isn't around that much and isn't even alluded to at all until she appears, basically, which sucks because that would have been a really cool build up too. But as a whole, I still think she's one of the best villains in all of Sentai, very interesting, and she's S tier. Next is Emperor Yodam from Hurricaneger, and he's another great villain, one of my favorites. He's probably the most intimidating villain out of all of them. He's really cool looking, and the fact that he has multiple personalities is really cool, although I wish he had more than 2, and one of them wasn't just glorified monster of the week. So I wish he was around more, but he definitely has a presence throughout the season, and once he does come, he's the most intimidating villain in all of Sentai, so he's S tier. Next is Bookelaus from Hurricaneger, and he's terrible. He's one of the worst villains. He's literally just a wall, so he literally can't do anything. He does get a different body in the finale, but that's the only time he actually does something. He's technically not even the main antagonist of Hurricaneger, the god is, so that's even more reasons to not like him. But he's just really lame, just a generic evil dictator, so he's D tier. Next is the Noto Council from Dawn Brothers, and Dawn Brothers is the other seasons where I don't think they have a main villain, so these are just kind of here by default. These 2 guys appear in a single episode, and I guess it's alluded to that they give all the orders to the Noto, so they're technically the main villains, but they literally appear in a single episode, so they're last by default in D tier. Next is Deathnarok, leader of the Bugnarok from ToQger, and he's just a really lame villain. He's just a generic evil leader of an organization or whatever. Doesn't really do anything until like the last 3 episodes of the first part of ToQger, and he doesn't even become interesting until after he's dead, so I think that's telling. He's D tier. Next is Dugdid Dejardin, leader of the Uchu from ToQger, and he's way better than Deathnarok. He's basically just a celestial being whose duty is to destroy planets, but he's bored with that, so he creates chaos in them to see what happens. So he's really interesting as like a godlike man-child, even though that's kind of just his entire personality. He's pretty intimidating, and the effects that he uses are cool. So overall, he's a pretty good villain. He's A tier. Finally, Wardo Spindo from Boonboomger, and he's a pretty good main villain. He is at least alluded to throughout the season up until his arrival, but I still feel like he isn't around long enough. He has another crime boss type villain like Dekaranger or Del Nero, but he's still pretty intimidating. He's based off Michael Jackson, so it's funny, and his grudge with Bundario is pretty cool, and overall is intimidating and a pretty good villain for the season, even if I wish he was around for longer. So he's B tier. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry I took an entire month off, basically, for making videos. I just had to finish up with school. I'm done now, so I should be more consistent with uploading. As for my next video, it's probably going to be making the Sentai villain factions or the lieutenants, and I'm working my way through the last couple seasons of Kamen Rider so I can make my Kamen Rider tier list. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Feedback is always appreciated. Have a great day.